Want to Know videos. I'm Hannah Richardson, and in this video, I will be analyzing The Railings and Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. As one of the characters, Septimus Warren, sits in Regent's Park, he sees white things were assembling behind the railings opposite. But he dared not look. Evans was behind the railings. Nope, not Chris Evans. Though he certainly does appear behind railings, he is not in Woolf's novel. Rather, Evans was Septimus' buddy during World War I. Unfortunately, Evans did not survive the war, and Septimus is very broken up about it and suffering from PTSD, or as it was then known, shell shock. So in this scene, we see Septimus alive on one side of the railings, and his dead friend Evans on the other side. And the white things may be other ghosts behind the railings with Evans. Another character, Maisie Johnson, sees Septimus as he is sitting there and feels she must cry, for that young man on the seat had given her quite a turn. Something was up, she knew. Horror, horror, she wanted to cry. Maisie unwittingly connects her horror to the railings, twisting the knob of the iron railing as she cries. Though the knob of the railings is not literally a doorknob, Maisie metaphorically opens a door to look through the railings at death in the form of this undefined horror. In another scene, Septimus is still sitting in Regent's Park, but now his contemplation is focused on the beauty of life. As he looks around him at the sunlight, at the trees, we welcome, the world seemed to say. We accept. We create. Beauty, the world seemed to say. Death is still present. The railings are still there in front of him, yet he sees beauty. As he looks around him at the houses, at the railings, at the antelope stretching over the palings, beauty sprang instantly. Paying close attention to the prepositions reveals the difference. In the previous scene, he was looking behind the railings and he saw death. In this scene, he is looking around himself and at the railings. He is looking at this side of the railings. He is no longer looking behind the fence at death, yet its presence contrasts with the beauty of life on this side of the fence and brings a greater appreciation for it. In the scene with Maisie Johnson, she sees dogs busy with the railings. These dogs are ignorant of the existence of death. While Septimus and Maisie sense the horror surrounding the railing, the dogs busy themselves around it, oblivious to what it represents. This obliviousness allows them to receive life something whimsical and mollified. For the animals, there is no seriousness or shadows in life to contrast with its joys, neither do they contemplate death. Like the dogs that Maisie saw, Septimus sees a sparrow perched on the railing opposite, chirping Septimus, Septimus 4 or 5 times over and over. The presence of the sparrow on the railing belies the horror and danger of what the railing represents, and the danger is increased by the sparrow beckoning like a siren to Septimus. The sparrow continues this beckoning with a deceptive message, singing from trees in the meadow of life beyond a river where the dead walk, how there is no death. This sparrow sits on the boundary between life and death, and yet proclaims that there is no death. In Septimus's final scene, he flung himself vigorously, violently down onto Mrs. Filmer's area railings. Septimus knows the railing's symbolism. He saw death on one side and beauty and life on the other. These two concepts war within Septimus's mind. Just before he throws himself out the window, Septimus thinks that he did not want to die. Life was good, the sun hot. The reference to the sun and life being good echoes his thoughts as he is looking at the alive side of the railings in the park. His concentration on life and beauty resembles the attitude of the animals. Perhaps Septimus wants to believe that there is no death, like the sparrow told him, and join them in the meadow of life. Yet his mind returns to his human perspective when he thinks, only human beings. What did they want? Feeling overwhelmed by his thoughts of death and his worries about the expectations of humans, he allows himself to be soothed by the thoughts of beauty, life, and that there is no death. So he heeds the call of the sparrow and joins him on the railings. In doing so, Septimus crosses to the other side of the railings, the side of death. At the end of the novel, the Bradshaws come to Mrs. Dalloway's party and tell her about Septimus' suicide. She imagines the scene. He had thrown himself from a window. Up flashed the ground, through him, blundering, bruising with the rusty spikes. There he lay with a thud, thud, thud in his brain, and then a suffocation of blackness. Like Maisie, Mrs. Dalloway does not know the symbolism that the Railings had for Septimus, but the knowledge of his death serves as a kind of railing as she sees the contrast between Septimus' death and the liveliness of her party. Mrs. Dalloway is horrified by the thought and thinks, what business had the Bradshaws talked of death at her party? A young man killed himself, and they talked of it at her party. The Bradshaws talked of death. The incongruity between death and her party at first repulses her. The juxtaposition causes her to think about the meaning of life. She had felt it only this morning. There was the terror, the overwhelming incapacity, one's parents giving it into one's hands, this life to be lived to the end, to be walked with serenely. There was in the depths of her heart an awful fear. This fear prompts her to search her soul to examine if she has lived her life well. Her search reveals herself less than satisfactory. She has schemed, she has pilfered, she was never wholly admirable. She had wanted success. Because of this, it was her disaster, her disgrace. It was her punishment to see sink and disappear here a man, there a woman, in this profound darkness, and she forced to stand here in her evening dress. Mrs. Dalloway is struck by how little she has done for these people who have sunk and disappeared into darkness. As it did for Septimus, the juxtaposition of life and death allows Mrs. Dalloway a deeper appreciation for life and beauty. But her appreciation appears to be morbidly parasitic. Mrs. Dalloway thinks the young man had killed himself, but she did not pity him. With the clock striking the hour 1, 2, 3, she did not pity him. With all this going on, she does not feel saddened by his death. She has only expressed annoyance that his death was brought up at her party. She felt glad that he had done it, thrown it away. The clock was striking. The leaden circles dissolved in the air. He made her feel the beauty, made her feel the fun. Mrs. Dalloway's increased appreciation for beauty and fun comes at the cost of a man's life, and she has no regret over the loss of life, but rather welcomes it. She callously casts aside her contemplation of life and death because she must go back to her party. Railings and Mrs. Dalloway symbolize the boundary between horror and death and life and beauty. Septimus's contemplation of the concepts ends in his death, the contemplation of which in turn exposes Mrs. Dalloway's selfish superficiality. Woolf's imagery of Railings encourages the contemplation of one's own life, whether it is lived well and to the benefit of others. The appreciation of beauty caused by the presence of death is a wonderful thing, but is not the purpose of life and ought not become the center of our lives. Unfortunately, the film misses out on the significance of this imagery. In the scene where Septimus imagines he sees Evans, there are no railings, and there is no sparrow beckoning to him. The scenes with Maisie Johnson and the dogs are missing from the film altogether. The only scene which hints at the significance of railings is the one in which Septimus kills himself on them. Another reason to read books and not just films. Books contain so much more than the film versions. That's it for this video. Now you know the significance of Railings and Mrs. Dalloway. Until next time, stay curious and read books.